Chapter 1. The New Hire. I don't remember applying for the job. It wasn't like I was looking for work. My life wasn't great, sure, but I had enough to scrape by. Yet somehow an ad had found me. Help wanted, fry cook, no experience necessary, apply in person. There was no company name, no phone number, just an address that didn't make sense. The coordinates led to an empty spot in the ocean, far from any landmass. But when I entered them into my GPS, they directed me to a small dock near my apartment. I should have ignored it. I should have laughed, but something about it compelled me. The next thing I knew, I was on a boat. The fog was thick, swallowing the world around me. The water beneath the boat churned sluggishly, like something was moving just below the surface. I clutched my ticket, a single greasy slip of paper with the Krusty Krab logo stamped in red ink. I don't remember falling asleep. But when I woke up, I was there. The Krusty Krab stood in front of me, exactly as I remembered from the cartoon, but wrong. The wooden planks were dark and swollen with moisture, encrusted with barnacles. The windows were greasy and yellowed, barely letting any light through. A flickering neon open sign buzzed by the door, though the letters distorted and shifted like they were struggling to stay in place. And then I saw him. SpongeBob. He stood at the register, just like in the show. But he wasn't animated. He was real. His sponge-like skin pulsed, moving almost imperceptibly, as though tiny things squirmed beneath it. His massive blue eyes were too large, too glossy, reflecting me like dark, empty glass. "You made it," he squealed, his voice exactly the same as the cartoon, but hearing it in real life made my stomach turn. It was too high-pitched, too forced. I should have run. I turned around, but the dock was gone. Only black water stretched endlessly in every direction. No land, no sky, just water and fog. My heart pounded. Where am I?" SpongeBob giggled. "You're at the Krusty Krab, silly, and you're our new fry cook." I tried to protest, but my mouth was dry. The air smelled like burnt grease and something rotting. Then the doors creaked open behind me. A massive, clawed hand grabbed my shoulder. "Get to work, boy." I turned and looked up into the hollow black eyes of Mr. Krabs. Chapter 2. The First Shift. The grip on my shoulder was too strong. Mr. Krab's claw dug into my flesh, the pressure sharp and unnatural. His skin, if you could even call it that, felt wet and leathery, like something that had been soaking in seawater for too long. I turned to face him, my breath caught in my throat. His face was just like the cartoon, but his eyes, they weren't eyes. They were black voids, endless pits that swallowed the dim, buzzing light around us. His mouth twisted into a grin, his teeth long, jagged, and yellowed. I could smell his breath, salt, decay, and the unmistakable stench of old blood. "We can talk about this," I stammered. I think there's been a mistake." His grin widened. "No mistakes, lad." His voice was deep, gurgling, like something speaking from the bottom of the ocean. "Ye signed up, that means ye belong to us now." The air around me shifted. The walls of the Krusty Krab breathed, the wooden planks flexing, expanding, contracting. The neon open sign flickered again, and for a split second, the letters twisted into something else. "Help me." SpongeBob clapped his porous hands together. Oh boy, a new employee. I just love training new fry cooks." I tried to back away, but Krabs shoved me forward, his claws sinking into my shoulder, the pain sharp and immediate. I winced, stumbling through the dimly lit interior of the restaurant. The grease-stained floor squelched beneath my shoes. This wasn't right. None of this was right. SpongeBob led me behind the counter, past the old flickering menu boards. The letters dripped, melting off the signs like grease. The prices made no sense. Krabby Patty, 3 souls. Kelp fries, 1 dream. Chum bucket platter, your flesh. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I was trapped here, and I wasn't alone. Chapter 3. The Kitchen. The kitchen was worse. SpongeBob pushed open the door, and I was hit with the stench. Not just old grease. Something foul, something rotting. The walls dripped, not with water, but with something thicker, darker. Meat. There were slabs of unidentifiable flesh hanging from rusted hooks, swinging gently as if disturbed by an unseen force. The grates in the floor were caked with sludge, and something moved beneath them. The fryer bubbled, but it wasn't filled with oil. The liquid inside was thick, dark red, blood. My stomach churned. I covered my mouth. What is this?" SpongeBob beamed at me, completely unfazed. "This is where the magic happens." He reached for a raw patty on the counter. It twitched, pulsing, beating like a heart. I stumbled back, shaking my head. "That's not beef," SpongeBob giggled. "Nope, it's better." He slammed the patty onto the grill. The screaming started immediately. The meat screamed. It let out a long, agonized wail as it sizzled against the hot metal. The sound was high-pitched, inhuman, and full of suffering. I slapped my hands over my ears, my skin crawling. "What the fuck is that?" I shouted. SpongeBob laughed again. "It's a Krabby Patty, silly." He grabbed the spatula, his movements unnaturally fast. "They're made with a secret formula." I turned to the grill. The patty twitched on the surface, the edges curling like it was trying to pull away from the heat. A single yellowed eye opened in the center of the meat, and it looked at me. I vomited. Chapter 4. The Meat Locker. I wiped my mouth, still gagging. My head was spinning. The air was thick with the smell of burnt flesh. Not beef, not fish, something else. SpongeBob clapped his hands together. "Oh boy, first day jitters. Happens to all the newbies." He shoved a plate into my hands, a perfectly assembled Krabby Patty. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. The bun was normal, soft. The lettuce, tomato, and cheese all looked real, but the patty was still moving. It twitched. A tiny hole opened in the center, like a gasping mouth. It let out a small, wet cry. I threw the plate across the room. SpongeBob frowned. The corners of his mouth twitched, and for a second, just a second, his entire face sagged. His sponge-like texture dripped downward before snapping back into place. "Mr. Krabs won't like that," he said softly. The room darkened. Something heavy moved in the shadows beyond the doorway. Something big. A deep, gurgling voice rumbled from the darkness. "Is there a problem, lad?" I shook my head, my hands trembling. I don't think I can do this." SpongeBob turned to the looming figure. "Oh, he's just being a big silly. He loves the job, right?" I swallowed. My throat was dry. "Yeah." The thing in the shadows stepped closer. The air thickened with the smell of salt, decay, and old blood. "Good," Mr. Krabs rasped. "Then get to work." SpongeBob grabbed my wrist with too many fingers. His porous hand felt damp and sticky, like something between rubber and rotten flesh. He yanked me toward the back of the kitchen. I tried to pull away, but his grip was impossible. He opened a heavy, rusted metal door. Cold air poured out, and the smell hit me like a freight train. Spoiled meat, something chemical, something dying. The meat locker. The inside was dark, too dark. Rows of hanging meat swayed gently from the ceiling, but there were no pigs, no cows, just shapes, human shapes. I staggered back. "Oh my God," SpongeBob beamed. "Neat, huh? This is where we keep the fresh patties." One of the hanging bodies twitched. Its limbs spasmed, and a weak, breathless whimper escaped its lips. It was still alive. I turned to run. SpongeBob's hand clamped on my shoulder. "Oh, no, no, no." His voice wavered, stretching into something not his own. "You're part of the crew now, and crew members." He shoved me inside. "Never leave." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. And then the bodies started whispering. Chapter 5. The Whispers in the Dark. The cold sank into my skin like needles. I pressed my back against the rusted metal door, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The whispering around me grew louder. Not words, just sounds. Gurgling, wet, rattling breaths, bones creaking. The hanging bodies twitched. One of them, closest to me, turned its head. I bit back a scream. The face was sunken, flesh stretched too tight over its skull. Its milky dead eyes locked onto mine. Its mouth trembled, lips peeling apart, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth. Then it spoke. "Run." I couldn't move. My body was locked in place, paralyzed by the unnatural horror in front of me. The other bodies started to shift, their ropes creaking, their fingers twitching. Then I heard it, the scratching. From the farthest corner of the locker, in the darkest shadows, something was crawling. I could only see its outline, long, bony limbs, a twisted torso, its head hanging at an unnatural angle. It moved in sharp, jerking motions, scraping its nails against the frost-covered floor. And then it laughed, a voice I recognized, SpongeBob, but it wasn't coming from the door behind me. It was coming from the thing in the shadows. The laugh distorted, warping into something deeper, something older. "You're gonna love it here." I slammed my fists against the door. "Let me out! Let me out!" The hanging bodies swayed faster, their whispers overlapping in frantic, panicked gasps. The thing lurched forward. It was too tall, too thin, its sponge-like flesh rotting and peeling. The holes in its body stretched wide, revealing writhing things inside. It opened its mouth, too wide, unhinging like a snake. Inside wasn't a throat. It was a meat grinder. The whispering turned to screaming. Chapter 6. The Secret Ingredient. The door flew open. A massive wet claw grabbed my shirt and yanked me out of the locker, tossing me onto the greasy floor of the kitchen. Mr. Krabs loomed over me, his black void eyes unblinking. His body was bloated, his shell covered in deep cracks and barnacles. He sneered. "Ye best not be wasting the product." SpongeBob skipped out of the locker, perfectly normal again, bright yellow, smiling, his big blue eyes twinkling like nothing had happened. "Aw, shucks," he giggled. "The new guy's just getting adjusted." Krabs growled. "He better. Otherwise, we make adjustments." I scrambled to my feet, my hands slick with grease. My mind was spinning. I had to get out. I had to. A wet plop made me freeze. I turned toward the cutting board. A severed arm lay there, pale and raw. The fingers still twitched. SpongeBob clapped his hands. "Back to work." Krabs leaned in, his breath hot and stinking of death. "Get cookin', boy." I stared at the arm, the meat locker, the patty with an eye, and I finally understood the secret formula, the Krabby Patties. They weren't beef. They weren't fish. They were us. Chapter 7. The Grinder. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I stood there, frozen, staring at the severed arm on the cutting board. The fingers twitched, curling slightly, as if still clinging to life. SpongeBob hummed cheerfully beside me. He grabbed a cleaver and brought it down. Chop! The hand was severed from the wrist. Chop! The fingers were separated, one by one. SpongeBob giggled, tossing them into a rusted meat grinder beside him. The grinder lurched, sputtering as the metal blades turned. The fingers disappeared into its depths, and a moment later, a thick red paste oozed out. SpongeBob scooped it up with his spatula. Perfect for a double patty deluxe. My stomach churned. This couldn't be real. This was a dream, a nightmare. I stepped backward, my shoes sticking to the blood-stained floor. "I'm not doing this." Krabs growled. His massive claw snapped shut inches from my face. "Oh, ye be doing it, boy." SpongeBob giggled, sliding the raw, pulsing meat into a Krabby Patty bun. "Gotta keep the customers happy. They get cranky when they go too long without the taste." A loud knock echoed from the front of the restaurant. Someone, or something, was at the order window. SpongeBob perked up. "Our best customer is here." He turned to me, his grin wider than before, too wide. His blue eyes twitched, and for a moment, I thought I saw something squirming beneath his skin. "Time to serve." Chapter 8. The Customers. The dining area was worse than the kitchen. The booths were filled with things that looked like people, but weren't. Their skin was grayish-blue, bloated like they had been waterlogged for days. Their mouths were too wide, stretching up toward their ears, filled with rows of jagged teeth. Their eyes were milky white, unblinking. They sat perfectly still, waiting. SpongeBob waltzed up to the counter. "One double patty deluxe." Coming up, I watched, horrified as he placed the human meat burger on a tray. One of the creatures lurched forward, its head twitching at an unnatural angle. It snatched the tray with rotting fingers and brought the burger to its gaping mouth. It didn't chew. It just absorbed the food. The patty sank into its skin, disappearing into its bloated body. The thing let out a low, satisfied groan, a sound that sent ice through my veins. SpongeBob turned to me. "See? They love it." Krabs chuckled. "Aye, they be loyal customers, always coming back for more." I looked around the room, my breath coming fast and shallow. There were no doors, no windows, only the exit sign, flickering in the far corner. But as I stared at it, the letters melted, twisting into something else. No escape. I stumbled back. What is this place?" Krabs grinned. His black, empty eyes reflected nothing. "This ain't just a restaurant, lad. It's a feeding ground. And you," his claw tightened around my arm, "are the next course." Chapter 9. The Meat Hook. Before I could react, something wrapped around my ankle. A thick, slimy tentacle shot up from the grease-coated floor, pulling me downward. I screamed, clawing at the tiles, but the surface was too slick with blood and fat. My fingers dug into the filth, slipping. SpongeBob clapped his hands. "Oh boy, looks like we got a fresh one for the grill." Krabs dragged me toward the kitchen. His claws were razor-sharp, cutting into my skin with ease. I kicked and struggled, but it didn't matter. The other kitchen workers, Shadowy figures with hollow eyes stood in place, staring as crabs hauled me toward the meat hook. A rusted hook hung from the ceiling, dripping with old blood. I thrashed harder. No, please! Krabs lifted me effortlessly with his massive claw. The hook swung closer, inches from my chest. Then I saw it. The names, carved into the wall beside the hook, hundreds of names, all former employees, all new hires. And at the very bottom, my name, already carved in. Krabs whispered into my ear, his breath reeking of the ocean, of rot, of death. Welcome to the crew, lad. Then he shoved me onto the hook. I felt the cold metal tear through my back. The pain was blinding. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. As I dangled, blood dripping onto the floor, SpongeBob leaned in close, his voice a soft, horrific giggle. You're gonna love it here. Then the grinder turned on, and the world went black.